So thank you, everyone. And Sally, well, Sally is, one of these pioneers that I've admired my whole life, that has inspired me as well to do what I do. We've been fortunate to do a fireside chat such as the one we're doing today together on a webinar with hundreds of people across the globe a while back, and decided that this was really fun and that we should do it in person. So Sally, this book that I've devoured and read several times that I really recommend to anyone who wants to understand better what are these obstacles that retain women from making it to the top. So you've been doing this for 30 years. Yes. And what got you started?
Like many people who wrote books that kind of hit a nerve, speaking of the female advantage, women's ways of leadership, it came from personal experience. All through the 1980s, I'd been in corporate communications, working mostly in New York, and I worked for great companies, and what I noticed is that the companies I worked for had almost no ability to understand what the women who were coming into their ranks had to contribute as leaders or in a strategic sense. And I figured that it was important to try to demonstrate to organizations what kind of resource they had that they were ignoring. So I decided that what I wanted to do was to write a book about some of America's best women leaders. I wanted to do it internationally, but couldn't get the budget. And I did diary studies of some of America's most successful women, of whom Frances Hesselbein was one, because Peter Drucker was on the cover of a magazine when I was doing my research saying that she should be running General Motors. And so that was really the first book that looked at what women had to contribute as leaders rather than how they needed to change and adapt. So I think as a result of being there first, companies and organizations began calling me, bringing me in for advice or to develop programs, and it just took off from there. I wrote 8 more books in the field and have been traveling the world for the last 30 years doing this very good work.
And what kind of evolution have you seen over the past 30 years?
I've really watched it evolve, and anybody who says, oh, it hasn't changed much, they weren't there. They were not there back in the 80s. I'd say the 3 biggest changes that I've seen have been, first of all, women have much more confidence in their ability to make a contribution as leaders than they did in the past. And one of the reasons for that is that our understanding of what constitutes excellence in leadership has changed since over the last 30 years. We hear, the U.S. Army is training leaders for empathy. We hear a lot of emphasis on the ability of leaders to motivate and engage and get people's hearts and souls, bring them to work, building strong relationships, direct communication with people. These were not necessarily seen as leadership skills, certainly not back in the 80s, when the idea was, a tough boss, may not be liked by anybody, but, he gets results. And that was sort of a lot of the message people were getting. So I think that the evolution of how we understand leadership has had a significant impact on women and given them confidence. The second thing that I see that has changed dramatically is the solidarity among women. And with all, its complexities, with Me Too, I see that Me Too is to some degree a manifestation of that, because women have often stepped up because they see another woman who's had an experience like they've had being torn apart publicly. But how that has really manifested in my work is that back in the 1990s, when you do women's leadership programs in companies, the most senior women, it was very difficult to get them involved at all. They did not see it as a positive for them in terms of career development or in terms of positioning. And you'd hear them say, I don't want people to think of me as a woman, I want them to think of me as a leader. There were some remarkable exceptions, but that tended to be true, and that has changed dramatically. Women are much more comfortable being allies and feeling a sense, I think, of solidarity with other women. The third thing, and this is big, and a little possibly more recent in its evolution, has been both the recognition on the part of women and the part of men that having male allies is essential to the effort we are making and to progress. And the question is more and more, how can men be more effective? And I think, I did a program, I've been doing programs for 30 years, and so often somebody will say, one of the planners will say, there are going to be a lot of men there. Probably 20% of the people there will be men. Okay, good. Yeah, I look forward to that. They're 4. Fine. I did this program in Las Vegas last year. It was a construction super conference, global construction firms, and they kept saying that, sector has a lot of men. I'm thinking, yeah, these guys at Construction Super Conference are really going to show up for a segment on women's leadership. And I walked into the room, and it was 65% men, and I was floored. And here's what I heard. You don't need to sell us on the need to develop, attract, retain, and engage women. You need to tell us how to get better at doing it. So to me, that is one of the biggest shifts I can imagine, and it really bodes well for the future.
3 years ago, I got an email, which I thought was a joke, on LinkedIn from this young Asian boy, maybe 16 years old, who said, I'm a student at UCC, Upper Canada College in Toronto, and we've got this student-led conference, and we vote for themes. And so we've got space exploration and artificial intelligence. And one of the themes that came up is the changing face of feminism, and we chose you to come and talk to us about this. And it's an all-boys school. And I thought, wow. I thought, seriously? And I said, well, could an adult send me a message just to confirm? And then I got this email from the dean saying, we'll cover your flight, your hotel, everything, come. And I went, and there was this huge room with all these 15 to 17-year-old boys. And it was fascinating. I was more intimidated than when I speak to CEOs, I'll be honest. So things are moving. That's positive.
Things are moving. Sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly, but they're moving.
Right. And so our role at Women in Governance and with our partnership with the Girl Scouts is to accelerate that movement. Because, if you look at what the World Economic Forum is saying, 180 to 120 years, depending on the country, we don't have that kind of time. I'd like to see it in my lifetime. So Sally, this wonderful book that you co-wrote with Marshall Goldsmith, does everybody know Marshall Goldsmith? If you haven't read his books, my favorite is What Got You Here Won't Get You There. Fascinating. You should really pick that up after you pick this one up, of course. So how did that partnership come about, and why did you decide to write this together?
Well, Marshall has been a friend and colleague for over 25 years. In fact, it was Frances Hesselbein who introduced us many years ago. And I'm a great fan also of his wonderful book, What Got You Here Won't Get You There, which is about how the habits and behaviors that can serve you well early in your career can become problematic as you seek to move to a more senior level. It was based on his now almost 40 years of executive coaching experience. It's a brilliant book. I thought the concept that the habits that can serve you well can then hold you back. I thought that concept was brilliant. But the behaviors that Marshall had in that book, while some of them were certainly gender neutral, many of them did not necessarily apply to women, at least as far as what I'd observed. They were more representative of Marshall's clients. For example, he starts off by saying, I think one of his first behaviors is, learn to apologize. And I thought, whoa, okay, you got that one wrong. Because we know, as many of us know, women are more likely to not be able to stop apologizing than to struggle with apologizing. It things like, don't always talk about how great you are. And again, it didn't really resonate with my experience. So I said to Marshall, you know, I'm finding this. I think we should collaborate on a book here that addresses the habits and behaviors that are most likely to get in women's ways because they are often distinct. Now, since the book came out, I've had, a day doesn't go by when a man doesn't come up to me and say, oh, I have habit 3, you know, overvaluing expertise or whatever it is. So these are human habits. They're not women's habits, but they are the habits that are, and behaviors most likely to get in the way of women as they seek to rise. So it really came from that template Marshall had devised, but then we were able to collaborate to identify the behaviors, particularly based on all the work I'd done, and it's been, you know, it's worked pretty well. We sold in 17 languages, and it's pretty interesting.
Well, one that I thought was interesting as well was to say that you should stop taking credit for what your team does when women actually are not putting themselves forward enough. So I think it's so smart that you've done this, because a lot of women have this tendency to focus on the content of their work and forget what's important out there, like being in the corridors and networking and talking about what you do well and what you want to do, and just sitting at your desk and hoping someone's going to notice and maybe tap you on the shoulder for that promotion and that raise. It doesn't work that way. So
that one habit, expecting others to spontaneously notice and value your contributions, is really foundational, and as well as overvaluing expertise. And what I've found in my career is that every great career is built on 3 legs. One is expertise. That is the ability to harness your talents in the service of a goal at their highest level. But the other 2, equally important, are visibility and the relationships and connections you build. So I think that I've too often heard women say in a new position, I'm just going to keep my head down and I'm going to learn to do this job as well as I can, and then I'll look up and start, you know, becoming visible and building relationships. And it's not a powerful approach.
Yeah, that's brilliant. And we also see how women will tend to say no to mentoring other women, which for me is problematic. We have a mentoring program at Women in Governance that, you know, obviously the fact that we look after CEOs to do that role, current or past, well, obviously we've got less women, but a lot of women who are in these roles will say, oh, I'm too busy at work. And they don't realize the importance of actually showing up and coming to these events where we've got all these CEOs that get together and they're all the mentors, etc. And the women, even if they say, okay, I'll do the mentoring, they'll do the mentoring, but they won't come to the event. Whereas the men, they'll be there at the event so that they're on the photo, on our social media, etc. And then they'll be harder to pin down to actually do the mentoring. So there's a bit of work there to do. But I think we still have a lot to learn and continue. So, Sally, what was the impact? Have you seen concrete impact with your book?
Yeah, I really have seen concrete impact. And I want to emphasize that one of the reasons I think this book has been as successful as it has, and even in, you know, Mongolian places I've never imagined selling rights, I think one of the reasons is that it is both diagnostic, but it also provides a realistic plan of action for beginning to address habits and behaviors that you recognize get in your way. So we have a real way of analyzing behaviors, and women will come up and tell, I have 9, I have 8, I have 6, you know, of these habits and behaviors. But, you know, that's good to know. It's good to do a self-diagnosis. But part of what you want to do is to be able to adapt them. And so how you do that is you focus on one at a time, and then, and this is the most important part of this book, you enlist people to help you. So you get out of that silo where you feel almost ashamed of what your weaknesses or capacities or what you exhibit that's going to get in your way. And you turn to other people and you ask for their help, their support. You know, we're going into a meeting. One of the things that I've seen happen in this meeting is my voice doesn't get heard. I'm trying to use my voice in a more powerful and intentional way. Would you please just watch me and see how I'm doing? See if it's effective. Give me any feedback on how that would be, of how I could get better. Or go to somebody who's particularly good at what you're trying to get better at. I notice you're very concise when you present in a meeting, very concise. Is there anything you do in preparation that I could do that could be helpful to me? I've gotten some feedback that I'm kind of all over the place. So that enlisting of help, it really engages other people as allies in your development. And while I think that the mentoring and sponsorship programs that organizations have put into place are vital and so important in terms of making progress, they can cause people to over-focus on, I need a mentor, I need a sponsor, whereas we all have the opportunity to build alliances with people at a broad range of levels. And one of the things that I know is that, especially with mentors and sponsors, they like to see people who already are building broad connections. So I think it's very powerful to have information exactly how to build alliances that will help you in your own career development. It's a very positive trend rather than sort of a hunt for, unconscious biases, et cetera. It's a positive way of framing it, and I think that people change their behavior because based on getting positive feedback. What I'm hearing, and I heard this, after in the follow-up from this super conference, which was such an eye-opener for me, is that having an awareness of how some of the habits and behaviors in this book, such as expecting others to spontaneously notice and value what you contribute, your contributions, or reluctance to engage allies from day one, or putting your job before your career, having an understanding of what those look like, how to identify them, and how they work, has the potential to help men be more effective and intentional mentors, sponsors, allies, champions, supporters, bosses, direct reports, colleagues, peers for women. That awareness, it opens up a positive conversation that's based in perceivable reality, not theoretical. And so it does that, but it also gives ideas on what a woman might be struggling with that might have been opaque or confusing before. So that's what we're finding, is it has a real clarifying effect, and why coaches especially and executive development people have jumped on it.
Mm-hmm. Well, at Women in Governance, we always think that men have a huge role to play in the solution. I mean, they're part of the problem, right? So they need to be part of the solution, and very often they feel that they want to make a difference, they don't know how. Yes, so if we open the door and we make them comfortable coming in, and that's what we've always done. I mean, our board is co-chaired by a man and a woman, and they're both two powerhouses. There's a parity on our board. On our permanent team, we've got about 35% of men. And you know what? When we say that the reason why we need more women in leadership roles and in the executive committees and on the boards is because you have different perspectives, right? Different opinions, and that makes for stronger decision making, for more innovation, etc. So if you believe in that, it just makes no sense, even for a women's organization, to stay among women, yes, right? So we actually embrace the fact that we've got people of both genders and different age groups as well. We've got people who bring, the whole tech piece to us through their younger knowledge, etc. We've got people from various countries as well. So this is, to me, is absolutely key. Now, Sally, tell me, in your opinion and in your experience, What can organizations do to actually facilitate women's ascension?
Well, I think that it's really important that organizations focus on helping women to develop their leadership capacity, to hold them accountable for being highly intentional in their thinking and clearly articulate what it is they envision themselves as being able to achieve or contribute. And I think the language of contribution really helps here. What they, at their best, could contribute, and then work with them, provide them with resources that help them identify the opportunities to develop both the skills and relationships that will enable them to do this and to make it a reality and to help them think big about what their possibilities are. I'm speaking of this from my experience, which is really as a leadership coach, consultant, author, and a deliverer of leadership programs worldwide. So I don't have as much to say about the importance, which is real, but it's not my experience of the kind of infrastructures that help parents balance their responsibility, and that has to be part of it as well. But I think that you know, in terms of the leadership, that a really informed program of offering support, visibility, ideas, and people to help women develop that potential. And I see a lot of companies that are really on track and have some excellent programs, and that is to some degree a change from in the past. We went through a period where all this was going to happen because you'd give employee resource groups a budget for 4 brown bag lunches a year, and this was somehow supposed to transform the organization. So I think there's a greater commitment of resources, and then a recognition that if the top leadership doesn't demonstrate support here, the message is never going to be really persuasive. And that's a fascinating part of it, because the behaviors and habits that are well-intentioned but don't land well at the most senior level can have an extraordinary impact on undercutting things. I remember working with a wonderful company. It was a petroleum company in Texas. And I went to see the CEO, who was a terrific guy. And on his desk, he had this sign facing outward that said, "Be brief, be brilliant, or be gone." And I said, you know, you're focused on creating an inclusive culture here. I'm wondering how this message supports that. And he just looked at me and he said, "Oh, somebody gave me that as a joke." And I thought, you know, that's the kind of thing that can happen. And I've seen that happen. I've seen it happen over and over. You know, just a thoughtless little gesture or acceptance of something can get in the way of what really, you know, this fellow, in his case, was very well-intentioned. So I think we have to get a little more explicit and honest about what some of the habits and behaviors that can hold the environment we're trying to create, which is one of inclusion. What can hold that back? And it's tough to do. I mean, I've had programs where I've got 35 male managing partners of, you know, global law firms, and they really don't want to hear it. And but I think it's important to include that as initiatives that will help move the needle.
Well, the tone at the top is really key, right? And so I hope Sally will have opportunities to do a lot of work in the States as well, now that our parity certification is available here. I mean, we work with organizations to assess what they do to attract, to retain, to promote, to compensate fairly women from entry level all the way to the top, because often people see our name, Women in Governance, and they think, oh, you're about the board. well, yes, it's important, but that's easy, right? To add 3-4 women to the board and all of a sudden you've got, you're in the parity zone. No, we're asking you a lot more than that. And we need to build a pipeline of female talent. Women need to know when they enter the organization that they actually have a future here. And, we always say if you can see it, you can be it. And if they don't see any women at the top, it just makes it a lot more complicated.
It makes it sort of impossible.
Right, exactly.
I hear that all the time. I mean, I cannot tell you how many women have left good companies and good jobs, and when you talk to them after they leave, they say there were no women who had real influence or power there, so I concluded I wasn't going to have, be able to have the career I wanted.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you so much, Sally. Thank you, Caroline. It's been a true pleasure, yes. So interesting. I think a lot of you will want to talk to Caroline and Sally after. I can't thank you enough for taking the time. I know I really much enjoyed the talk and the questions as well. I wish we had more time, but I know you are all busy. I just wanted to say a few words from Chris Hilbert. Chris Hilbert is partner at Norton Rose. He's on the advisory committee of our office, and so he contributes to helping help me achieve my objectives, but also some of our clients, as we can say, from Quebec who come and try to make it in New York. And so he's helped Caroline and Women in Governance. Yes, and he is unfortunately suffering from a cold, but he wanted to say this before I introduce our closing remarks by Annick Lapointe. He said, I do want to say that from my male perspective as a lawyer, both within law firms and watching business and society in New York City, it seems clear that gender equality is something that still needs a lot of work. Many times throughout my career, I've seen gender equality given lip service, but not in fact observed, and I have seen how easy it is to fall into complacency. It's hard for me to say from French, or old habits, or let excuses justify avoiding equality. He said, I'm personally convinced that achieving gender equality is still going to take more work and constant vigilance. An organization like Women in Governance, which performs an objective gender equality certification using rigorous methods, is an important part of it. The approach and energy I've seen at Women in Governance makes them particularly suitable to play a significant role in helping us achieve gender equality. I wish wonderful people at Women in Governance do the same success that they've had in Canada here in the United States. So here you go from Chris himself.